My name is Azora Stephen, and I am 32 years old. Right now, I am standing in the shadows near the coat check of a rented ballroom at the St. Regis in Atlanta, Georgia. The air conditioning hums beneath the chatter of 150 corporate executives and local press. The room smells like eucalyptus and white roses, the signature scent of the skincare empire I built from a studio apartment. On the lit stage, at the front of the room, my parents Richard and Helen hold crystal champagne flutes. Between them stands my 29-year-old brother Julian. He wears a custom-tailored tuxedo, paid for by a corporate credit card he does not legally own. My mother steps up to the microphone. Her diamond earrings catch the spotlight as she smiles at the crowd. She leans in and announces that to take Aura Botanicals to the next level, the company requires fresh, visionary leadership. She raises her glass and presents my brother as the new Chief Executive Officer. The crowd claps. Investors I courted, supply chain managers I trained, and distributors I negotiated with all raise their glasses to a man who does not know the entry code to our own warehouse. Julian flashes a practiced smile and waves. I stand 50 feet away, watching my parents revel in a lie. My mother had called me twice this week to dictate my wardrobe, demanding I wear a drab navy overcoat so Julian would stand out tonight. The heavy wool scratches against my neck. I keep it buttoned to my collarbone, hiding the razor-sharp crimson suit I wear underneath. I take a slow sip of sparkling water. The condensation drips down the glass onto my fingers. I do not scream. I do not march up to the stage. I just watch them build a glass castle as high as they can. What Julian and my parents do not realize is that 15 minutes ago, I sat in a private suite on the 4th floor of this hotel. I slid a silver pen across a legal addendum invoking the founder clause of my operating agreement. In exactly 2 minutes, the billionaire chairman of our advisory board is going to walk through the heavy oak doors beside me and turn this coronation into a termination. Before the double doors open and the truth ruins their night, please take a moment to like and subscribe to Sophia Told Stories. Drop your age and your current location in the comments so I know who is listening with me. To understand the sheer audacity of my parents renting a ballroom to steal my life, we have to go back 14 months to the day I made the singular mistake of hiring blood. The conflict did not start with a boardroom coup. It started quietly in my own warehouse with a brother who wanted a title and a father who believed my success was just a family asset waiting to be handed to a son. 14 months before the ballroom doors swung open to ruin my family, I made the singular worst decision of my professional life. I hired my brother. To understand the sheer audacity of my parents renting the St. Regis to hand my empire to Julianne, you have to understand the dirt from which that empire grew. Aura Botanicals did not start in a sleek corporate park. It started in a 400-square-foot studio apartment in downtown Atlanta. For 3 years, my life smelled permanently of raw shea butter, cold-pressed rosehip oil, and cardboard. I slept 4 hours a night. I burned my fingertips sealing glass vials with hot wax because I could not afford automated packaging machinery. I drove a 10-year-old sedan with a busted heater across state lines pitching my serums to independent boutique owners who looked at me like a naive girl with a hobby. My parents did not fund me. They did not encourage me. My father, an accountant who views risk as a moral failure, told me I was throwing away a perfectly good college degree to peddle expensive lotion. My mother just sighed and changed the subject whenever I tried to show her my sales projections. I did not need their applause. I put my head down and worked. I turned that studio apartment hustle into a sprawling logistics powerhouse. By my 30th birthday, Aura Botanicals was supplying 400 high-end retail locations across the American South. We moved out of the studio and into a custom warehouse facility. I managed a payroll of 50 people. I negotiated global supply chain contracts. I built a fortress of revenue. While I was building a fortress, Julian was busy getting fired for the 3rd time in 4 years. Julian had always been the golden child. He possessed that specific brand of unearned confidence that mediocre men carry when they have been told their entire lives that they are exceptional. He had a generic business degree, a closet full of expensive golf shirts, and an inability to arrive at an office before 9:30 in the morning. His latest termination was from a mid-level logistics firm. The official reason was a lack of culture fit. The reality, according to a contact I had at the firm, was that Julian spent 6 months delegating his actual work to unpaid interns while taking 3-hour lunches to network. The day he lost that job, my phone rang at 2 in the afternoon. I was standing on the warehouse floor wearing a high-visibility vest and steel-toed boots, running an inventory audit on 10 pallets of Moroccan argan oil. It was my mother. She was crying. Not the quiet tears of genuine grief, but the tactical, breathless weeping she weaponized whenever she needed me to fix a problem she had created. She told me Julian was devastated. She said his spirit was broken by corporate environments that did not understand his unique leadership style. Then came the pivot, the trap I knew was coming but was too exhausted to dodge. She begged me to give him a job. Not just a job, a title. She told me he needed a vice president role to boost his confidence and get him back on his feet. I stood there in the noise of forklifts and shouting line workers, holding my phone to my ear. I looked around at the concrete and steel reality I had bled to build. I thought about the golden child dynamic that had defined my entire existence. If Julian brought home a B-, my parents treated him to dinner. If I won a regional business award, they asked if I was making time to date. I knew hiring him was a mistake, but the guilt worked. The sheer exhaustion of fighting my family worked. I wanted my mother to stop crying. I wanted my father to look at me just once and say I was a good daughter. I thought if I gave Julian a hollow title and a corner office, it would buy me peace. I brought him on as Vice President of Brand Relations. It was an empty designation. I structured the role so he had 0 direct reports and 0 access to company funds. He did not know our chemical formulas. He did not know our warehouse security codes. He could not read a basic profit and loss spreadsheet without asking my financial director to explain the red numbers. But Julian knew how to play the part. He bought 3 custom-tailored suits his first week. He requested a standing desk and a frosted glass door for his office. He began attending marketing meetings he was not invited to. 2 months and my creative team spent 4 grueling weeks designing a localized digital ad campaign for our new lavender line. They worked weekends. They tested algorithms. When the campaign launched and exceeded our quarterly sales metrics by 40%, Julian sent a company-wide email. He congratulated the team on executing his vision. He took the credit with the smooth, effortless grace of a man who truly believed he had earned it. My marketing director stormed into my office threatening to quit. I spent 2 hours talking her down, giving her a silent bonus, and begging for her patience. I told her Julian was just a figurehead. I told myself the exact same lie. I allowed his vanity to fester because I was too distracted by a much larger prize. I was preparing for our Series A funding round. I was hunting a whale named Harrison Cole. Harrison is a man who values ruthless efficiency over everything else. He runs a venture capital firm out of New York that controls billions of dollars in equity. He does not invest in potential. He invests in brutal, undeniable profit margins. Harrison is legendary in our industry, not just for his wealth, but for his absolute lack of sentimentality. During our first dinner at a steakhouse in Buckhead, he told me a story over his second glass of scotch. 5 years ago, he invested $10 million into a tech startup run by his own nephew. 3 quarters later, the nephew missed a critical revenue projection by 2%. He tried to excuse the failure by blaming market conditions. Harrison did not raise his voice. He simply signaled the waiter, paid the check, and had corporate security walk his own flesh and blood out of the building before the dessert arrived. That is the caliber of investor I brought to the table. Harrison Cole cares about numbers, logic, and execution. He views nepotism not as a moral failing, but as a structural weakness to be eliminated. I spent 80 hours a week opening my books to Harrison and his analysts. I subjected Aura Botanicals to the most intense financial colonoscopy imaginable. I shielded Julian from this process entirely. I kept my brother away from the venture capital meetings because I knew if Harrison Cole spent 5 minutes listening to Julian talk about brand synergy, he would withdraw his funding and laugh me out of the room. I thought I was managing the situation. I thought I had compartmentalized the family drama away from the corporate reality. Julian was in his sandbox playing executive, while I was in the boardroom securing the future. But Julian did not want to stay in the sandbox. The fake title I gave him to appease our mother had acted like fertilizer on his ego. He grew bored of simply taking credit for marketing campaigns. He wanted to wield actual authority. He wanted to feel the weight of the power I had spent years earning. He decided he was going to prove his worth not by creating anything new, but by exerting control over the foundation I had already laid. He went digging into the vendor files. And when he found the contact information for the most vital supplier in my entire manufacturing chain, Julian decided it was time to play Chief Executive Officer for real. The conflict did not start with a boardroom explosion. It started with a quiet, invisible overreach. In botany, there is a specific type of parasitic plant called the strangler fig. It germinates in the high canopy branches of a healthy host tree. Slowly, over years, it drops roots down to the forest floor until it encases the original tree. It steals the sunlight. It suffocates the roots. Eventually, the host tree dies, leaving only the hollow shell of the strangler fig standing in its place. Julian was my strangler fig. 3 months into his hollow tenure as vice president of brand relations, my inbox pinged at 6 in the morning. I was in my kitchen pouring black coffee over ice, preparing for a 12-hour sprint to finalize our quarterly tax projections. The email was a forward from Eleanor Vance. Eleanor runs the largest independent botanical farm in Savannah, Georgia. She has supplied my cold-pressed rosehip oil since the studio apartment days. She is a woman who conducts business on handshakes and mutual respect, not aggressive corporate leverage. Her email contained no greeting. It just said, "I thought you should see this. Azura, we have a contract. I do not appreciate these tactics." Below her message was an email thread initiated by Julian. The timestamp was 2 in the morning. He had bypassed my procurement team entirely and emailed Eleanor directly. The subject line read, "Restructuring Vendor Agreements, Q3." The body of the email was a masterpiece of unearned corporate arrogance. He informed Eleanor that Aura Botanicals was tightening its supply chain margins. He demanded an immediate 20% price reduction on all bulk shipments of rosehip oil. He threatened that failure to comply would result in us seeking alternative vendors in Southeast Asia. Then my eyes hit the signature block. It did not say Julian Stephen, Vice President of Brand Relations. It read, Julian Stephen, Acting President, Aura Botanicals. The ice cracked in my coffee glass. I set it down on the granite counter so hard, some of the liquid spilled over the rim. Julian did not know that Southeast Asian rosehip oil lacked the specific lipid profile required for our flagship serum. He did not know that Eleanor Vance was the only supplier in the region who could meet our volume demands without compromising organic certification. He did not know any of this because he had never spent a single minute studying our supply chain. He just wanted to feel the rush of throwing his weight around. Worse, he had awarded himself a promotion, acting president. He was testing the waters. He was seeing how much territory he could annex before anyone noticed. I did not march into the office and fire him. That would have been the logical executive decision. But family dynamics are rarely logical. I picked up my phone and called the architect of Julian's entitlement. I called my father. Richard Stephen is a certified public accountant who runs a small firm in a mid-tier office park in Decatur. He has spent 3 decades manipulating ledgers. He applies the same accounting principles to his family. To my father, emotions are liabilities to be minimized. Julian is a high-yield asset that simply requires more investment. I am a stable blue-chip stock that requires no attention but is expected to generate reliable dividends. He answered on the second ring. His voice carried that practiced professional warmth he reserves for clients. Dad, we have a serious problem. Julian just threatened our primary botanical supplier in Savannah. He demanded a 20% price cut and signed his email as acting president. He is inflating his title and jeopardizing our supply chain. The line went silent for 4 seconds. I could hear the faint clicking of his keyboard in the background. When he spoke, his voice dropped an octave, adopting a tone of weary patience. It was the same tone he used when I was 12 and complained that Julian had broken my science project. Azura, do not be so dramatic. He sighed, a heavy, measured exhalation designed to make me feel small. He is threatening vendors, Dad. He is using a fake title. He is showing initiative, Azura. He is trying to protect your profit margins. You are always so quick to assume the worst of him. He is your brother. He wants to impress you. Why do you always have to make things so combative? The gaslighting was immediate, subtle, and devastatingly precise. In 3 sentences, my father had rewritten reality. I was no longer a chief executive officer defending a critical vendor relationship. I was a jealous older sister stifling her younger brother's ambition. I was the aggressor. Julian was the victim of my unreasonable standards. I stood in my kitchen, staring at the spilled coffee. If I pushed the issue, my father would escalate the narrative to my mother. She would call me weeping about how I was tearing the family apart. They would demand I apologize to Julian for stifling his creativity. I swallowed the anger. I hung up the phone. I spent the next hour drafting a carefully worded apology to Eleanor Vance, citing a miscommunication from a new department head. I smoothed over the damage Julian caused. I cleaned up his mess just as my parents had conditioned me to do since childhood. I let the incident go. I returned to my spreadsheets and the grueling preparation for Harrison Cole's financial audit. I told myself it was an isolated incident, an over-eager mistake by a man trying to prove his worth. I was wrong. I was dangerously, naively wrong. I did not realize that the email to Eleanor was not an accident. It was a reconnaissance mission. Julian was testing the structural integrity of my authority. And by calling my father instead of firing my brother, I had shown them exactly where the cracks were. My parents did not view Aura Botanicals as my personal achievement. They did not see the sleepless nights, the maxed-out credit cards, or the anxiety of building a company from zero. To them, the company was a family asset. It was a piece of generational wealth that had unfortunately germinated in the wrong child's hands. They believed the company was merely being held in a trust until the rightful heir was ready to claim it. The email signature was not a typo. It was a declaration of intent. The strangler fig had dropped its first root. The siege had begun. And the next move they made would not involve an email to a vendor. It would involve a 15-page legal document designed to strip me of my life's work. 6 months ago, on a humid Friday afternoon in late April, the strangler fig finally breached the topsoil. The executive suite of Aura Botanicals was quiet. Most of the administrative staff had already left for the weekend. I was still sitting at my desk reviewing a logistics bottleneck in our Memphis distribution center. We had 3 tons of raw shea butter delayed by a freight strike, and I was calculating the financial impact of routing the shipment through commercial air freight. Julian had abandoned his office 3 hours earlier. He told my receptionist he had an urgent networking engagement. I knew from the pristine white polo shirt and spiked shoes he wore that his engagement involved 18 holes at the local country club. I needed a specific vendor contract we had drafted for a new packaging supplier. The physical copy was locked in Julian's filing cabinet. I walked down the hall to retrieve it. His office smelled of expensive cologne and entitlement. He had a shelf full of hardcover business strategy books with unbroken spines. A crystal putting glass sat in the corner. He had not bothered to close his door. He had not even bothered to lock his computer. His laptop sat open on the mahogany desk, the screen glowing softly in the dimming afternoon light. I leaned over the keyboard to tap the spacebar, intending to wake the machine and search the shared network drive for a digital copy of the contract. The screen flickered to life. Julian had dozens of browser tabs open: golf swing tutorials, luxury watch forums, high-end car leases. But hovering over all the clutter was a minimized Word document. The file name was stark against the chaotic background. Transition Plan Q3. I stopped. The cursor hovered over the icon. My chest tightened. A cold, primal instinct crawled up the back of my neck. My hand hovered over the mouse for a fraction of a second before I clicked the file. The document expanded, filling the entire screen. It was not a marketing strategy. It was not a brand relations proposal. It was a 15-page legal and structural roadmap to steal my company. I scrolled through the pages, my breathing shallow and measured. The text was dense, formatted with precise corporate terminology. Section 1 detailed a comprehensive reorganization of the executive board. Section 2 outlined a transition of voting power. Section 3 was a calculated knife to the throat. The header read, "Invocation of Medical Fitness for Duty Clause." I read the paragraphs underneath. The document laid out a chilling argument, claiming the founder, Azora Stephen, was exhibiting severe signs of emotional burnout. It cited my long working hours as evidence of dangerous mania rather than executive dedication. It framed my recent quiet frustrations over Julian threatening the supply chain vendors as emotional volatility. The proposal recommended the board temporarily relieve me of executive duties for health and wellness reasons. Once I was deemed legally unfit, the plan outlined an immediate structural pivot. I would be moved into a newly created position called Chief Creative Officer. The role was defined as a figurehead status, carrying a generous salary, but zero voting rights and zero operational control. I would be a silent mascot, locked out of the boardroom. The final page displayed a mock organizational chart. At the very top, sitting alone in the Chief Executive Officer box, was Julian Stephen. I stood in the quiet office reading the blueprint of my own execution. Julian did not write this. My brother possessed the ambition of a conqueror, but he lacked the intellect and the stamina to draft a legally binding corporate coup. He did not know what a fitness for duty clause was. He did not know how to structure an equity transition. I moved the mouse to the top left corner of the screen. I clicked on the File Properties tab. I opened the metadata. Author, Richard Stephen. Last modified, Richard Stephen. My stomach dropped. The air in the room felt suddenly thin. My father had written the document. The man who taught me how to ride a bicycle, who signed my report cards, who sat at the head of our Thanksgiving table, had spent his evenings drafting the legal framework to destroy his daughter. He was using his 3 decades of accounting expertise to search for vulnerabilities in my operating agreement. He was actively plotting to stage a corporate mutiny behind my back in the very office my sweat had paid for. Staring at the glowing screen, the sterile white background of the Word document blurred. A vivid memory rushed into the empty space. I am 16 years old. I am standing in the gymnasium of our local high school holding a heavy wooden plaque and an oversized check for $1,000. I have just won first place at the state science fair for a complex hydroponic irrigation project I spent 7 months building in our garage. The gymnasium smells like floor wax and teenage sweat. I am beaming. I am waiting for my parents to look at me with the pride they reserve for my brother's mediocre athletic achievements. My father walks up to me. He does not hug me. He looks at the check. He tells me I need to endorse half the prize money over to Julian. He says Julian helped carry the heavy display boards from the car to the gymnasium. He tells me family shares in every victory. I stood in that gymnasium and handed over $500 to a boy who had spent my entire presentation playing video games in the bleachers. I did not yell. I did not confront them. I swallowed the injustice because I thought compliance would eventually earn their respect. That pattern had never stopped. It merely evolved. The stakes grew from science fair checks to multi-million-dollar logistics empires. To my father, my intelligence and my work ethic were natural resources to be mined for Julian's benefit. He did not see my company as a testament to my brilliance. He saw it as a tragedy of inheritance. He truly believed it was a cosmic error that the daughter possessed the drive while the son possessed nothing. He was simply trying to correct the universe's mistake by putting the asset back into the hands of the golden child. I looked back at the screen. The Transition Plan Q3 document was a weapon pointed directly at my head. They were not just trying to give Julian a prestigious job. They were trying to declare me legally unstable to justify a hostile takeover. They wanted the prestige, the revenue, and the power without enduring the grueling 80-hour work weeks required to build it. A lesser executive might have printed the document, marched to the country club, and screamed at her brother on the 18th green. A more emotional daughter might have called her father in tears, demanding an explanation for the betrayal. I did none of those things. If they were trying to build a legal case that I was emotionally volatile, a screaming match would only provide them with the evidence they desperately needed. The fire inside me burned cold. I opened a new browser tab. I logged into an encrypted private email account I kept separate from the company's servers. I attached the Word document. I sent it to myself. I waited for the confirmation notification to ping on my phone. Once the secure transfer was complete, I closed the email tab. I minimized the Word document exactly as I had found it. I left the tabs for the luxury cars and golf swings open. I returned the laptop to its precise previous state. I did not leave a single fingerprint on the crime scene. I turned off the lights in Julianne's office. I walked down the quiet hallway, the sound of my heels muted by the thick carpet. I gathered my purse from my desk. I rode the elevator down to the parking garage in total silence. Driving home through the Friday evening traffic, the reality of the situation settled over me like a heavy winter coat. I was no longer running a business. I was fighting a war against saboteurs who shared my DNA. They had drawn the battle lines using corporate bylaws and psychological manipulation. They thought my lifelong habit of keeping the peace would make me an easy target. But a war requires two sides. I knew my father's strategy. I knew Julian's entitlement. I needed to know where the final piece of the puzzle stood. I needed to test the depth of the delusion. Before I could launch a counterstrike, I had to know if my mother was a silent bystander or a willing participant in my execution. I pulled my car into my driveway, picked up my phone, and invited her to lunch. I needed to test the depth of the delusion. I had to know if my father was acting as a lone saboteur or if the entire family unit had colluded in the drafting of my execution. The following Tuesday, I invited my mother to lunch. We met at a bistro in Buckhead, a high-end establishment characterized by crisp linen tablecloths, the faint scent of roasted garlic, and patrons who communicated in hushed, measured tones. Helen Stephen arrived looking immaculate. She wore a tailored beige blazer and a string of pearls resting perfectly against her collarbone. She greeted the hostess by her first name and glided toward my booth carrying an aura of practiced Southern elegance. We ordered salads and iced tea. For the first 20 minutes, the conversation hovered safely over trivialities. She discussed the unseasonably warm Georgia weather, a charity silent auction she planned to attend, and the new landscaping company she had hired for their backyard. I nodded, sipping my water, letting her dictate the rhythm. I knew the pivot was coming. I just had to wait for her to find the right angle of approach. It happened between bites of endive and candied pecans. Her posture shifted. She set her silver fork down on the porcelain plate with a soft, deliberate clink. She leaned forward, resting her manicured hands on the table, her expression melting into a mask of deep, manufactured pity. Azora, you look so exhausted lately. I held my glass, keeping my face entirely neutral. I have been putting in standard hours, Mom. The Series A audit requires a thorough financial review. She sighed, reaching across the table to pat my wrist. Her touch felt light and entirely unearned. It is more than just hours, honey. You look hollow. Your father and I have been so worried about your health. You are carrying too much weight on your shoulders, and it is changing you. You seem so tense, so quick to anger these days. The strategy was blindingly clear. My mother was laying the social groundwork for the exact narrative my father had typed into that hidden Word document. She was road testing the fitness for duty clause over a midday meal. They needed a history of emotional instability to justify removing me, and she was actively trying to rewrite my current state of mind to fit their legal requirements. She offered a gentle, sympathetic smile. Julian is such a natural leader. People just respond to his energy. Have you thought about stepping back for a while? You could take a sabbatical, rest your mind, let your brother handle the heavy lifting while you focus on your well-being. My mother was asking me to hand over a multi-million-dollar logistics empire under the guise of a wellness retreat. She delivered the request with the casual ease of a woman asking to borrow a sweater. I pulled my wrist out from under her hand. I kept my voice dead flat, devoid of the very emotion she was desperately trying to provoke. He does not know the supply chain, Mom. He cannot identify our primary botanical yields. He is a liability in a boardroom. The sympathetic mask vanished. The sudden drop in her facial features was jarring. Her smile hardened into a tight, unforgiving line. The warm Southern mother disappeared, replaced instantly by a woman who had just been denied her favorite prize. You are so selfish. The words hung in the air, sharp and unvarnished. You have enough money, Azura. You have the title. Why can you never share the spotlight with your brother? We raised you both to share. We taught you that family comes first. But you insist on hoarding every bit of success for yourself. He is your own flesh and blood, and you treat him like a rival. The conflict was no longer about business acumen, profit margins, or operational competence. My mother did not care that Julian lacked the skills to run Aura Botanicals. She did not care if he bankrupted the company in 6 months. The business was irrelevant. The only metric that mattered to her was family loyalty, and she had weaponized that loyalty to break me. If I kept my company and protected my employees, I was a terrible, selfish daughter. If I surrendered my life's work to a man who spent his afternoons at the country club, I was a good one. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I did not shed a single tear. Crying would only give her the emotional volatility she needed for their transition plan. I signaled the waiter, handed him my corporate card, and paid the check. I stood up from the booth. Enjoy the rest of your salad, Mom. I walked out of the bistro into the glaring afternoon sun. The betrayal was complete. I was entirely alone. But the isolation did not paralyze me. It crystallized my focus. They expected me to retreat. They expected me to internalize the guilt and slowly fold under the pressure of their unified front. They thought my lifelong habit of avoiding family disputes would translate into a quiet corporate surrender. Instead of arguing, I went on the offensive. I drove straight from the restaurant to the main distribution warehouse. I bypassed the executive suites and walked directly onto the concrete floor of the logistics hub. The air smelled of raw packing materials and the rich, earthy scent of our signature serums. Forklifts hummed in the background. I found Valerie, my head of logistics, standing near the loading docks, holding a digital tablet. Valerie is a woman built of sheer pragmatism. 5 years ago, she was a single mother working the night shift at a generic fulfillment center. I hired her when I was still shipping boxes out of my studio apartment. She took a chance on a naive girl making lotion, and I took a chance on her raw organizational brilliance. Today, she commands a 50-person team and knows the exact location of every single vial we produce. She is fiercely loyal to the company because we built it together. I tapped her on the shoulder. Valerie, we need a closed-door meeting, right now. She took one look at my face, handed her tablet to a shift supervisor, and followed me into a windowless inventory management office. I locked the door behind us. I did not share the emotional family drama. I did not tell her about the lunch or the hidden documents. A chief executive officer does not dump personal trauma onto her staff. She simply issues clear operational directives. We are locking down the entire supply chain, Valerie, effective immediately. She crossed her arms, leaning against a metal filing cabinet. Define locking down. No outbound shipments exceeding $5,000 leave this facility without my direct biometric authorization. I want you to reroute all vendor communication channels. Any external email from a department head requesting a price alteration, a contract adjustment, or a shift in delivery schedules must be flagged and routed to a hidden administrative queue that only you and I can access. Valerie raised an eyebrow. Her mind processed the implications rapidly. That sounds like you are building a firewall against someone inside the building, Azura. I am building a firewall against unauthorized executive overreach. Furthermore, I want the access protocols on the inventory management software updated tonight. We are initiating a mandatory system-wide password reset. When the new credentials are issued, the Vice President of Brand Relations will retain read-only access. He will not be able to alter a single shipping manifest or view our raw material acquisition costs. Valerie nodded slowly. A faint, knowing smile touched the corner of her mouth. She had seen Julian swagger through the warehouse holding his coffee mug, treating her floor staff like personal assistants. She understood the assignment without needing the ugly details. Consider the doors locked, Azura. Nobody touches the roots of this operation without your key. I left the warehouse feeling the first genuine surge of power I had experienced in weeks. My parents and my brother were busy measuring the branches of the tree. They were admiring the foliage drafting transition plans and arguing over who deserved to sit in the shade. They did not realize that I had just descended into the soil and encased the root system in steel. Julian could parade around his office in custom suits. He could call himself acting president in his emails. But he was now operating a shadow console. He could push all the buttons he wanted, but none of them were connected to the actual machinery of my empire. I had secured the physical and digital boundaries of my business. But the warfare was about to shift from the logistics floor to the minds of my investors. Julian and my father, having failed to provoke a public breakdown from me, decided it was time to change their tactics. If they could not make me act unstable, they would just have to convince everyone else that I was. Over the next 3 months, the conflict shifted from a cold standoff to an active, silent siege. My father, Richard, having secured my mother's complicity, began to execute the logistical framework of his transition plan. He could not remove me without a board vote. My company structure was airtight, but he knew that even an ironclad operating agreement could buckle under enough social pressure and investor panic. He started taking my minor investors out for expensive steak dinners. These were local Atlanta business owners and early seed funders who held small percentage stakes in Aura Botanicals. They were people who respected my father's accounting background and trusted his fiscal conservatism. He used those dinners to plant seeds of doubt. He did not launch frontal attacks on my leadership. He was far too calculating for that. Instead, he played the role of the deeply concerned patriarch. He would order a dry martini, lean across the linen tablecloth, and lower his voice. He would mention how proud he was of his daughter's initial success, but quickly pivot to the unsustainable toll it was taking on her. He dropped calculated phrases like emotionally volatile and severe burnout. He painted a picture of a brilliant founder who had simply hit her operational ceiling and was now spiraling under the pressure of scaling a logistics empire. Then he would seamlessly introduce the solution. He presented Julian not as an aggressive usurper, but as a stable, educated successor. He framed my brother as the steady hand required to guide the company through an upcoming public offering. He leveraged Julian's gender, his custom suits, and his empty corporate vocabulary to convince these men that the company needed a traditional executive figurehead to survive its own growth. I learned about these dinners through my head of logistics. Valerie had a cousin who worked as a sommelier at the steakhouse my father favored. The sommelier recognized Richard and overheard enough of the conversation to understand that the father was actively lobbying against the daughter. When Valerie relayed the information to me, I did not panic. I did not send furious text messages to my father demanding he stop slandering my name. If I reacted with anger, I would only provide him with the exact evidence of emotional volatility he was trying to sell to the investors. I realized that my parents and my brother were observing my every move. They were studying my posture, my tone of voice, and the hours I kept looking for any sign of the mental collapse they were engineering. I decided to give them exactly what they wanted to see. I decided to manufacture a breakdown. I began arriving at the office 30 minutes later than usual. I stopped wearing my tailored executive suits and started wearing oversized neutral sweaters and flat shoes. I allowed my hair to look slightly unkempt. I instructed my administrative assistant to cancel my routine morning briefings, citing a need for quiet focus time. I stopped fighting Julian in the weekly departmental meetings. When he interrupted me to pitch absurd marketing synergies or demand larger budgets for vanity projects, I did not shut him down with the sharp operational logic I typically employed. I just sighed, rubbed my temples, and told him we could discuss it later. I played the part of a woman drowning in her own responsibilities. Then, I deployed the red herring. On a Tuesday afternoon, I carried a large, heavy-duty cardboard banker's box into my executive suite. I placed it squarely in the center of my desk, where anyone walking past the glass walls of my office could clearly see it. I started packing. I did not pack rapidly. I moved with slow, deliberate lethargy. First, I took down my framed degrees, the Bachelor of Science in Chemistry, the Regional Entrepreneurship Awards. I wrapped them carefully in bubble wrap and placed them at the bottom of the box. Next went the vintage brass desk lamp I had purchased with my first major retail check. Then I stacked my specialized botanical reference books, the ones filled with my handwritten margin notes and chemical formulations. I spent 3 days slowly dismantling the visible proof of my authority. I stripped my office of its personality, leaving only the sterile corporate furniture and a blank computer monitor. On Thursday morning, Julian walked past my office on his way to the break room. He paused outside the glass wall. I was holding a framed photograph of my original studio apartment, wiping dust from the glass before placing it into the cardboard box. I looked up and met his eyes. I forced my expression to convey a deep, hollow exhaustion. I let my shoulders slump. Julian did not ask if I was okay. He did not offer to help. A slow, triumphant smirk spread across his face. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his thumbs moving rapidly across the screen. I found out later, through the metadata of his company-issued device, that he had texted my father immediately. The message read, "The stress is finally breaking her. She is packing her office." My father replied, "Excellent. Stay the course. Do not push her. Let her surrender on her own terms." They were celebrating. They truly believed their psychological warfare had successfully broken my spirit. They thought I was preemptively clearing out my desk because I had accepted the inevitability of the fitness for duty clause. They thought I was stepping aside to let the golden child ascend the throne. They were spectacularly wrong. I was not packing my office because I was surrendering to mental fatigue. I was packing my valuables for a highly practical and entirely cold-blooded reason. I knew exactly how Julian reacted when he was denied a prize he believed he deserved. I had seen him throw a golf club into a lake because he missed a putt. I had seen him punch a hole in his bedroom wall because our parents refused to buy him a new car for his high school graduation. I knew that when the trap I was building finally snapped shut on his leg, his reaction would be explosive. I knew he would throw a temper tantrum of monumental proportions. I was packing my favorite desk lamp and my framed degrees because I did not want Julian to smash them against the wall when I finally fired him. I sealed the banker's box and locked it in the trunk of my car. I returned to my sterile, empty office and sat behind my bare desk. I smiled at Julian in the hallways. I let my father pay for steak dinners. I allowed them to wallow in the absolute certainty of their impending victory. My manufactured surrender accelerated their timeline, just as I had calculated. They grew sloppy with confidence. They believed the fortress was abandoned and the gates were wide open. And because they were no longer looking for traps, they walked directly into the massive financial snare Julian was about to set for himself. My silence accelerated their timeline. When an enemy believes you are retreating, They often abandon strategy for speed. They become sloppy. Julian and my father, seeing my packed office and manufactured exhaustion, decided it was time to strike the final blow. They needed a stage. They needed an audience. And they needed me to pay for it. On a Thursday morning, Julian swaggered into my executive suite. He carried a glossy presentation folder. His posture radiated the arrogant ease of a man who believes he has already won the game. He dropped the folder onto my bare desk. "I pitched a concept to Dad," he said, leaning over the wood surface. "We need a supplier appreciation and charity gala. Aura Botanicals has grown too fast. We need to solidify our vendor relations and generate some local goodwill." He opened the folder to a budget breakdown. He requested $25,000 from the corporate account to secure the main ballroom at the St. Regis Hotel. I looked at the numbers. $25,000 was a substantial expenditure for a mid-sized logistics firm, but it was not an unreasonable request for a legitimate corporate event. I looked up at Julian. His eyes held a flicker of nervous anticipation. He was waiting for the resistance. He was waiting for me to argue the cost or question the necessity. I reached for my silver pen. I did not blink. I signed the authorization line on the first page. "Make sure the floral arrangements match our branding," I said, handing the folder back. Julian blinked. The tension left his shoulders, replaced instantly by a smirk he could not fully suppress. He took the folder and walked out of my office, his stride bouncy, triumphant. He thought he had just manipulated an exhausted, emotionally fragile woman into writing a blank check. He was partly right. I had written the check. But I knew exactly what I was buying. A chief executive officer does not authorize a $25,000 expenditure without verifying the vendor contracts. 5 minutes after Julian left the building, I logged into the corporate accounting portal. I pulled the preliminary invoice from the St. Regis event coordinator. The event title on the hotel invoice did not read Supplier Appreciation and Charity Gala. It read Aura Botanicals Executive Transition Gala. My pulse remained steady. I did not feel shock. I felt the cold, satisfying clarity of confirmation. I cross-referenced the guest list Julian had submitted to our internal administrative team. He had not invited a single charity partner. He had not invited Eleanor Vance or the other primary vendors. Instead, the list was a meticulously curated roster of Atlanta's corporate elite. He had invited regional bank managers, minor investors, the president of the local chamber of commerce, and journalists from 3 prominent business publications. They were planning a public coronation. The strategy was brutally effective in its psychological architecture. They knew my history. They knew I possessed a lifelong, deeply ingrained habit of avoiding public confrontation to keep the peace. They believed that if they stood on a lit stage in front of 150 high society guests and announced Julian as the new chief executive officer, I would freeze. They banked on the assumption that my supposed mental fragility would prevent me from causing a scene. They assumed I would simply smile, nod, and accept the coup, rather than risk the embarrassment of a public family meltdown. They were using my own corporate credit card to fund the theft of my life's work. A younger Azura, the girl who handed over half her science fair prize money, would have confronted them immediately. She would have canceled the hotel contract, locked the corporate accounts, and demanded an explanation. She would have engaged in a screaming match in the living room of our childhood home. But that girl no longer existed. The woman sitting behind the desk was an executive who had spent years negotiating brutal supply chain logistics. I knew that interrupting an enemy while they are making a catastrophic mistake is bad business. I operated with the flat, emotionless efficiency of an assassin. I did not block the venue payments. I did not contact the hotel to change the run of show. I did not intercept the embossed ivory invitations that were mailed out to the city's elite. I even discovered a folder on the shared corporate drive containing pre-drafted press releases. The documents praised Julian Stevens' visionary leadership and noted my transition to a creative advisory role to focus on health and wellness. I left the files untouched. I gave them exactly what they needed. I gave them resources. I gave them time. I gave them the illusion of total control. I was giving corporate saboteurs enough rope to hang their own narrative in front of an audience they had paid to assemble. My parents were so focused on building the glass castle for their golden child that they failed to realize they were building it on a fault line. They thought they were orchestrating a seamless transfer of power. They did not understand that power in the corporate world is not conferred by a speech or a tailored tuxedo. Power is defined by the operating agreement, by the equity distribution, and by the absolute loyalty of the board of directors. They had spent months lobbying minor investors who held single-digit percentages of the company. They had manipulated the local narrative. But they had fundamentally miscalculated the geography of the battlefield. They were playing checkers in a ballroom, while I was playing chess in the boardroom. While Julian was busy picking out past hors d'oeuvres and selecting the jazz trio, I was preparing to deploy the ultimate countermeasure. The fitness for duty clause my father had banked on required a board vote. And the board was not controlled by the minor investors eating steak dinners in Atlanta. The board was controlled by a man who resided 1,200 miles away in New York. A man who detested family drama and worshipped profit margins. It was time to introduce Harrison Cole to my father's transition plan. 2 weeks before the St. Regis Gala, I booked a commercial flight to New York. I did not use the corporate travel agency. I paid out of pocket and flew coach to ensure the expenditure never crossed my father's desk. I carried a single leather briefcase containing 2 items: a hard copy of the Transition Plan Q3 document and a comprehensive dossier detailing every unauthorized vendor threat and inflated title Julian had deployed. I needed to see Harrison Cole. Harrison operates his venture capital firm from the 42nd floor of a glass tower in Midtown Manhattan. He is a man who builds empires on mathematics. He does not care about family legacies or the emotional nuance of sibling rivalry. He cares about the structural integrity of his investments. When I walked into his office, he was sitting behind a massive slab of polished mahogany, reading a quarterly earnings report on a tablet. He gestured for me to sit without looking up. I did not offer small talk. I opened my briefcase and slid the 15-page Transition Plan Q3 document across the desk. I placed the dossier of Julian's unauthorized emails directly on top of it. My father and my brother are attempting a hostile takeover, I said, keeping my voice level. They plan to use a fitness for duty clause to remove me and install Julian as chief executive officer. Harrison finally looked up from his tablet. He picked up the documents, but he did not open them. He leaned back in his leather chair, crossing his arms. He did not look surprised. He did not look angry. He simply smiled. It was a cold, predatory smile, the kind a wolf gives a trapped rabbit right before the trap snaps shut. "Your father beat you here by a week, Azura," he said. The air in the room seemed to freeze. My blood ran cold. The sheer logistical nightmare of my father bypassing me to speak directly to the chairman of my board hit me like a physical blow. Richard flew up last Tuesday. Harrison continued, his voice smooth and detached. He took me to dinner at Le Bernardin. He ordered a very expensive bottle of Bordeaux and spent 2 hours presenting forged medical evaluations. He claimed you were suffering from acute emotional exhaustion. He wanted my proxy vote to trigger the fitness for duty clause and install Julian. He said he was stepping in to protect his daughter's health and the board's investment. The absolute betrayal stung deep in my chest. My father had not just drafted a plan on a computer. He had weaponized his accountancy credentials, forged medical documents, and traveled 1,200 miles to assassinate my character in front of my largest investor. He had actively tried to poison the roots of my company, using my own supposed mental frailty as the venom. I sat very still, gripping the arms of my chair. "Did you sign his proxy request?" Harrison let out a short, harsh laugh. He tossed the Transition Plan Q3 document back across the desk. "I am a venture capitalist, Azura, not a pediatrician. I do not intervene in family squabbles, and I certainly do not sign binding legal proxies over a steak dinner based on unverified medical claims from a protective father." I told Richard I would review his concerns. Harrison leaned forward, resting his elbows on the mahogany desk. The predatory smile vanished, replaced by the sharp, calculating gaze of a billionaire. Then I had my own analytics team run an independent audit of your logistics network, Harrison said. I reviewed your supply chain efficiencies. I examined your raw material acquisition costs. Your margins are up 22% this quarter. You have reduced shipping delays by 14% despite a regional freight strike. He tapped his index finger against the dossier of Julian's emails. Your father is a fool, Harrison stated flatly. He assumes I invest in genetics. He assumes I value a mediocre son in a custom suit more than I value a proven executive generating a 22% profit margin. I do not care if you sleep 4 hours a night. I do not care if you look exhausted. As long as your numbers climb, you are the only chief executive officer I recognize. The validation washed over me, erasing the sting of my father's betrayal. My parents had spent my entire life trying to convince me that Julian was the superior asset simply by virtue of his existence. But in the cold, hard light of corporate mathematics, their delusion evaporated. I nodded, absorbing the magnitude of the shift. The battlefield was clear. My father thought he had secured the board. He thought he was walking into a coronation. He did not realize he was walking into an execution. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a second, much thinner folder. I placed it gently on the desk in front of Harrison. I am invoking the Founders Clause outlined in Section 4 of our operating agreement, I said. I am terminating Julian Stephen for cause, specifically gross misrepresentation and breach of fiduciary duty. Furthermore, I am initiating a formal corporate fraud investigation against Richard Stephen regarding the forged medical evaluations he presented to this board. Harrison opened the thin folder. He read the termination drafted by my personal legal counsel. He read the invocation of the Founders Clause. He did not object. He did not ask for revisions. They are hosting a gala next Saturday at the St. Regis in Atlanta. I continued, my voice steady. They used my corporate account to rent the ballroom. They plan to announce Julian's ascension to 150 of our investors and distributors. They believe my psychological conditioning will force me to accept the coup publicly. Harrison closed the folder. He met my eyes. And what exactly is your play, Azura? I want you there, I said. I want the chairman of the board to walk into that ballroom and deliver the termination notice personally. I want you to shatter their reality in front of the exact audience they paid to assemble. Harrison looked at the termination papers. He looked at me. The predatory smile returned sharper this time. He appreciated the ruthless efficiency of the strategy. He appreciated the theatricality of destroying a saboteur on their own stage. He reached for the silver pen resting on his desk and signed the board authorization line on Julian's termination paper. I will book my flight, Harrison said. I left the glass tower in Midtown Manhattan feeling lighter than I had in 14 months. The snare was set. The trap was fully loaded. My father and my brother had spent half a year digging a grave they intended for me. They had forged documents, they had lobbied investors, they had rented a ballroom. They had done all the heavy lifting. All I had to do now was go home, put on the navy overcoat my mother requested, and wait for them to jump into the hole they dug. The 14 days between my flight back from New York and the Saturday gala required a level of psychological discipline I did not know I possessed. I had to walk into my own headquarters every single morning and pretend I was a defeated woman. I had to swallow the bile rising in my throat while I watched parasites drain the energy of my floor staff. Julian treated that final week like a prolonged victory lap. He strutted through the executive suites and the logistics floor, radiating a toxic, unearned confidence. On Tuesday afternoon, I watched through the glass walls of my office as he cornered Valerie near the break room. He stood too close, holding a ceramic coffee mug, gesturing broadly with his free hand. He was talking about new directions and streamlining operations. He told her there would be significant structural shifts coming by Monday morning. He promised her a seat at the table if she played her cards right. Valerie just nodded, her face an emotionless mask. She knew exactly what I had done to the inventory software. She knew Julian could not authorize a shipment of cardboard boxes, let alone restructure a department. Earlier that morning, Julian had attempted to route a catered lunch to the executive suite using a corporate vendor code. The system rejected his request due to the new security protocols. He blamed a software glitch. Valerie blamed the servers. Neither of them mentioned the firewall I had erected. She played her part flawlessly, feeding his delusion with polite silence. After leaving, Valerie Julian pushed my door open without knocking. He strolled over to my desk and leaned against the edge, crossing his ankles in his expensive golf shoes. He looked down at the empty surface where my framed degrees used to sit. A satisfied smirk played on his lips. He reached out and patted my shoulder. The physical touch made my skin crawl, but I forced my muscles to relax. He told me to take it easy this week. He said he had everything under control and that I needed to focus on recovering my stamina. I looked up at him and smiled a thin, fragile smile. I thanked him for his support. He walked out, whistling a tune I did not recognize. He truly believed he had conquered an empire. He did not know he was ruling over a mirage. On Thursday evening, my phone rang while I was reviewing freight contracts at my kitchen island. It was my mother. Her voice carried a frantic, breathless energy. She was coordinating the final details of the St. Regis event with the hotel staff. She bypassed any normal greeting and launched straight into a critique of my wardrobe. "Azura, you need to dress appropriately for Saturday," she commanded over the line. "Do not wear one of those severe black business suits you always insist on putting on. They look far too rigid. We want the tone of the evening to feel celebratory, not corporate." I asked her what she suggested. "Wear that subdued navy overcoat," she replied instantly, "the long, shapeless one. It is a big night for the family. We want Julian's custom tuxedo to really pop under the ballroom lighting. If you wear something sharp, it will just distract from his moment. You need to blend in, honey." My mother was explicitly instructing me to render myself invisible at an event funded by my own bank account. She wanted me draped in dark, heavy fabric so the guests would focus their attention entirely on the golden child. She wanted me to fade into the background while my brother claimed the harvest of my labor. "Of course, Mom," I replied, my tone perfectly hollow. "I will wear the navy coat." She sighed a sound of profound relief. "You are finally being reasonable, Azura. I am so proud of you for accepting this transition gracefully." I hung up the phone. The next morning, I drove to an upscale boutique in the Buckhead shopping district. I did not own a shapeless navy overcoat. I had to buy one specifically for my own execution. I found a drab wool trench coat that fit my mother's exact specifications. It was heavy, dark, and entirely devoid of structure. It looked like a garment designed to hide whoever wore it. I purchased it without trying it on. But I did not leave the boutique. I walked past the outerwear section and entered the tailored suiting department. I spent 2 hours working with a master seamstress. I purchased a 2-piece power suit. The fabric was a striking blood red. The cut was razor sharp. The blazer featured structured shoulders and a tapered waist that commanded attention from across a room. It was not a garment meant for blending in. It was a visual declaration of war. It was woven armor meant for a chief executive officer preparing to reclaim her territory. I brought both items home. I hung the crimson suit inside the navy overcoat in my closet. The trap was now aesthetically complete. I would give my mother the subdued daughter she demanded for the cocktail hour. But when the time came to settle the ledger, I would shed the camouflage. Friday afternoon, my father arrived at the office. Richard rarely visited the Aura Botanicals headquarters. He preferred to operate from his accounting firm in Decatur, pulling strings from a safe distance. But he could not resist coming to inspect the surrendered territory on the eve of his victory. He stepped into my office holding a leather briefcase. His eyes scanned the bare walls, the packed cardboard box resting on the floor, and my intentional lack of makeup. He smiled, a warm, genuine smile that I had not seen directed at me since I was a child. He walked around the desk and placed his hands on my shoulders. "You are doing the right thing for the family by resting, Azura," he said, his voice thick with paternal affection. "You built a wonderful foundation here. but the stress is too much for one young woman to bear. Letting your brother take the reins is the smartest executive decision you have ever made. We are going to take such good care of you." I stared at the silk tie resting against his chest. My father was looking at a daughter he believed he had successfully broken. He felt no guilt. He only felt the sweet satisfaction of correcting a cosmic error. He truly believed he was rescuing the family legacy from my fragile emotional state. He was congratulating me for surrendering my own throat to his knife. I did not flinch. I did not pull away from his grip. I nodded slowly, playing the role of the defeated founder. I told him I was looking forward to the gala. While he patted my back, I visualized the interior of Harrison Cole's leather briefcase. I pictured the termination documents resting safely in the dark. I pictured my father's forged medical evaluations sitting right next to them. I calculated the exact trajectory of the financial ruin that would strike Richard Stephen when his fraudulent machinations were exposed to a room full of corporate reporters. I smiled. It was the most genuine expression I had worn all week. My father left the office to take Julian to a celebratory steak lunch. I remained behind, sitting in the quiet, sterile silence of my executive suite. The sunlight shifted across the hardwood floor, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I had become a ghost haunting a house I actually owned. My family walked right through me, discussing furniture arrangements and paint colors for walls they did not possess. They had spent months hiring movers, renting venues, and ordering custom suits for a hostile takeover that ended the moment I visited New York. They believed they were the exorcists preparing to banish a troublesome spirit. They did not realize that the spirit held the deed to the property and the locks had already been changed. The sun set on Friday evening, casting long shadows across my empty desk. Tomorrow night, the ballroom at the St. Regis would fill with 150 guests. Tomorrow night, the music would play, the champagne would flow, and the golden child would step into the spotlight. I packed my purse and locked the office door, knowing the illusion was about to shatter. Saturday night descends on the city with a humid, stifling heat, but the air inside the St. Regis ballroom is crisp, climate-controlled, and fragrant. I step through the grand entrance, and the sheer scale of the financial waste hits me in the chest. The ceiling drips with tiered crystal chandeliers, casting a warm, golden hue over the rented space. The room smells heavily of fresh-cut eucalyptus and imported white roses. It is the exact botanical signature of my flagship skincare line, recreated in towering floral architecture spanning the perimeter of the room. I know the precise invoice total for those arrangements. It is a sickening sensation to stand inside an opulent theater funded by a stolen corporate credit card. 150 guests populate the floor. The crowd is a meticulously curated roster of Atlanta royalty. Regional bank executives in tailored tuxedos sip premium bourbon. Local business journalists hover near the open bar, taking mental notes. Early-stage venture capitalists form tight circles, laughing at quiet jokes. I navigate the edge of the room holding a tall glass of sparkling water. The ice cubes clink against the crystal rim, providing a tiny rhythmic distraction. I am wearing the drab, shapeless navy wool overcoat my mother selected. It hangs past my knees, burying my silhouette in dark, heavy fabric. I keep it buttoned tight up to my collarbone, trapping my body heat. Beneath the scratchy, stifling wool, the tailored crimson suit waits. It feels like wearing a loaded weapon to a cocktail party. The contrast between my appearance and the glittering event does not go unnoticed. Several regional distributors catch my eye as I walk past the catering stations. Their expressions shift from polite recognition to sheer, unfiltered confusion. They look at my oversized coat. They look at my bare, makeup-free face. I appear as though I am attending a wake. Across the room, my brother is hosting a master class in unearned arrogance. Julian stands near the center of the room, stationed beside an intricate ice sculpture carved into the Aura Botanicals corporate logo. He wears a midnight blue tuxedo with silk lapels and a velvet bow tie. He holds a flute of vintage champagne, gesturing smoothly with his free hand. He looks like a groom waiting for a bride. He is currently trapping Marcus Vance, a key distributor from Nashville, in a conversation. I watch Julian's lips move from 20 yards away. I can read the corporate buzzwords forming in the empty air between them. Streamlining, synergy, visionary scaling. Marcus nods politely, but his eyes dart around the room, betraying a deep, profound unease. Marcus knows Julian cannot calculate a basic freight margin. Marcus has spent 5 years negotiating complex shipping logistics directly with me. Yet Marcus also recognizes the staging of a public succession, and he is trying to calculate which side of the sinking ship he needs to stand on. A few yards away from the ice sculpture, my parents are working the crowd. Helen glides between investors, touching arms, projecting maternal warmth. Richard stands near the bandstand, introducing himself to a prominent business columnist. They literally glow. It is a radiant, blinding pride that I have never witnessed before. When I was awake at 3 a.m. packing glass vials with bleeding cuticles, they never looked at me with that specific warmth. When I secured our first $1 million retail contract, they asked if I was eating enough vegetables. They reserved their true adulation for the son who knew how to spend the money I bled to print. They are basking in the success of their transition plan, entirely ignorant of the trapdoor waiting beneath their polished shoes. Marcus Vance manages to extract himself from Julian's monologue. He spots me lingering near a marble pillar and walks over. He glances at my heavy wool coat, his brow furrowing. "Azura," he says, his voice low, cautious. "I received the invitation earlier this month. It was very vague. Julian is over there talking about restructuring the entire Southeastern distribution network. Tell me the rumors are false. Tell me you are not stepping down." I take a slow sip of my sparkling water. The carbonation burns the back of my throat. I look Marcus directly in the eye. "There will be a definitive shift in executive leadership tonight, Marcus," I reply, keeping my tone perfectly even. "The board is taking permanent action to secure the future of the supply chain." Marcus sighs, his shoulders slumping. He assumes the worst. He assumes the board is forcing me out due to the whispering campaign my father launched. I am sorry to hear that, Azura. This company is nothing without your formulas. "Enjoy the open bar, Marcus," I say, offering a thin, polite smile. "The landscape will look very different by tomorrow morning." He nods and walks away to join a group of anxious suppliers. I do not correct his assumption. The beauty of dramatic irony lies in the silent possession of the truth. My mother catches sight of my interaction with Marcus. She excuses herself from a venture capitalist and marches over to my pillar. Her smile remains fixed for the audience, but her eyes are sharp, calculating. "Azura, you are hiding in the shadows," she hisses through clenched teeth. "Go mingle. Let the press see you supporting your brother." "I am supporting him exactly as you requested, Mom," I say, gesturing to my buttoned coat. "I am blending in." She inspects the dark wool fabric. A flicker of genuine satisfaction softens her tight expression. "You did the right thing, honey. This coat is perfect. It hides your tension. Just stand quietly and let him have tonight." I'm going to let him have exactly what he deserves tonight. She misses the subtext entirely. She reaches out, squeezing my arm with a sudden burst of counterfeit affection before returning to the crowd to secure her social capital. I walk away from the glittering center of the gala. I bypass the catering station serving seared scallops and beef tenderloin. I retreat to the absolute back of the ballroom. I position myself next to the main entrance, marked by 2 heavy oak double doors. The brass handles gleam under the ambient wall sconces. This is the tactical vantage point. From here, I can see the entire stage. I can see the microphone stand waiting for the announcement. I can see the exact layout of the illusion they have constructed. The jazz trio plays a smooth, melodic tune over the hum of 150 conversations. Julian raises his glass in a toast to a group of minor shareholders. He is bragging about the board of directors. He is telling them how thrilled the advisory committee is with his new strategic direction. He is weaving a fiction so dense, he actually believes the fabric is real. He is entirely unaware of the reality occurring on the pavement outside the hotel. He does not know that a black town car has just pulled to a stop at the valet curb. He does not know that the uniformed doorman is currently opening the rear passenger door. He does not know that a billionaire holding a leather folio is stepping onto the concrete, preparing to walk through the lobby. I reach into the deep pocket of the navy overcoat. My fingers find the smooth glass screen of my phone. I pull it out, shielding the glow with my palm. The time reads 7:45. The jazz trio transitions into an upbeat tempo, signaling the hotel staff to begin directing guests toward the stage for the speeches. I open my messaging application. I select the contact saved simply as Harrison. I do not type a long explanation. I do not ask for a status update. I type 4 words. The stage is yours. I hit send. I slide the device back into my pocket. I lean against the cool plaster wall beside the heavy oak doors and wait for the music to stop. The upright bass player plucks his final thick string. The drummer brushes the snare drum one last time, letting the wire bristles drag to a soft halt. The jazz trio fades into a deliberate, calculated silence. The ambient chatter of 150 corporate guests lingers for a few brief seconds before the distinct, sharp ring of silver striking crystal cuts through the air. My father stands at the center of the elevated platform at the front of the ballroom. He holds a champagne flute in his left hand and a silver butter knife in his right. He taps the delicate glass 3 more times. The crisp chimes echo over the venue's speakers, commanding immediate obedience. The crowd turns toward the stage. Conversations halt mid-sentence. Waiters freeze in their tracks, holding heavy silver trays of hors d'oeuvres. The stage is bathed in harsh, white spotlights, illuminating the floral arches behind the podium. Richard places the knife on a nearby high-top cocktail table and grips the microphone stand. He wraps his free arm around Julian, pulling my brother tight against his side. It is a posture of profound paternal endorsement. Richard looks out over the sea of tailored suits and evening gowns. He breathes in the attention like oxygen. For 30 years, he managed ledgers for mid-tier dental practices and regional car dealerships. He spent his life calculating the wealth of other men. Tonight, he stands on a stage funded by my sleepless nights, playing the role of a corporate titan. Thank you all for being here. My father says, his voice booming through the grand space. The microphone catches the deep, practiced resonance of his chest. He spent hours rehearsing this exact cadence in his home office, practicing the pauses and the inflections. Aura Botanicals has grown beyond our wildest dreams. What started as a small local venture has blossomed into a logistics powerhouse supplying the entire southeastern corridor. He uses the pronoun our. He speaks of the company as a collective family project that simply willed itself into existence. He mentions the expansion into 400 boutiques. He notes the recent supply chain optimizations. He lists the very achievements I bled to secure over the last 5 years. Yet he does not say my name. He does not point to the back of the room. He does not acknowledge the founder standing in the shadows. He strips my identity from my own creation, presenting my empire as an anonymous inheritance waiting to be claimed by the rightful heir. But to scale globally, Richard continues his tone shifting from reflective pride to authoritative business strategy. The enterprise requires fresh, decisive leadership. It requires someone with unclouded vision. We need a steady hand at the wheel to guide us into the next decade of profitability. I stand 50 feet away, translating his corporate speak in real time. He delivers the insult with smooth, terrifying ease. He stands in front of my distributors and investors, suggesting the company needs a steady hand, implying that my hand is unstable. He sells the narrative of my emotional fragility without ever explicitly stating a medical diagnosis. He paints a picture of a sinking ship that he is bravely rescuing before the hysterical female captain can crash it into the rocks. Richard's smile steps back and gently hands the microphone to my mother. Helen glides forward into the spotlight. She wears a silver evening gown that catches the stage illumination, making her appear almost ethereal. She clutches a small lace handkerchief in her manicured fingers. She lifts the delicate fabric to the corner of her eye, dabbing away a perfectly orchestrated tear. She has practiced this exact gesture in her vanity mirror, ensuring her mascara remains flawless. It is the performance of a devastated but resilient matriarch, stepping up to make a difficult sacrifice for the good of the business. It is our greatest honor as parents and unofficial advisors, she begins, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion, to ensure this company reaches its highest potential. We have always put family first. We have always done what is necessary to protect the legacy. And tonight, we are taking the most important step in that journey. She turns her head to look at Julian. Her gaze holds a radiant, blinding affection. It is the same look she gave him when he managed to tie his own shoes or pass a middle school spelling test on the third attempt. It is an unconditional worship that ignores all evidence of his actual incompetence. She looks at him as if he single-handedly discovered the cure for a rare disease, rather than threatening a rosehip supplier in Savannah. Please raise your glasses. Helen projects her voice over the silent, expectant crowd. It is with immense pride that we announce the new Chief Executive Officer of Aura Botanicals, our son, Julian Stephen. The ballroom erupts. 150 people begin to clap, some of them cheer. Marcus Vance stands near the bar applauding with a hesitant, rigid motion, his eyes darting toward the exits. Other investors slap their hands together enthusiastically, believing they are witnessing a clean, authorized succession plan. The regional bank managers nod in approval, assuming the transition has been vetted by legal counsel. Hidden cannons mounted near the vaulted ceiling detonate with a soft, pneumatic pop. Thousands of shimmering gold and white confetti strips rain down over the crowd. The paper catches the chandelier light drifting through the air like slow-motion snow. It falls on the catering tables. It lands in the champagne glasses. It covers the shoulders of the elite attendees. It is a stunning visual spectacle purchased with $25,000 of my own corporate funds. Julian steps forward to the microphone. The applause washes over him. He closes his eyes for a fraction of a second, soaking in the adulation he has craved his entire life. He has never built a product. He has never secured a vendor contract. He has never stayed awake for 48 hours balancing a logistical nightmare while a freight strike threatened to bankrupt his operation. Yet he stands there, absorbing the applause, as if every single clap validates his inherent superiority. He opens his eyes. He flashes that expensive, bright smile. He reaches up and adjusts his silk cuffs, shooting his monogrammed sleeves perfectly out from his tuxedo jacket. He grips the microphone stand with both hands, leaning forward into the spotlight, adopting the posture of a seasoned visionary. The applause begins to taper off. The room settles into a hushed, expectant quiet, waiting for the new king to deliver his inaugural address. In the deep shadows at the back of the room, I make my move. I reach up to the top button of the heavy, drab navy overcoat. I slip the plastic disc through the buttonhole. I move to the second, then the third. The scratchy, stifling wool parts down the middle. I shrug my shoulders, letting the shapeless fabric slide down my arms. The coat falls away. A young attendant standing behind the coat check counter watches me with wide, confused eyes. I hand the dark, heavy fabric to her without a word. She takes it, folding it over her arm, unsure of what is happening. I step out of the shadows and into the ambient glow of the brass wall sconces. The tailored crimson suit catches the light. The blood-red fabric is sharp, structured, and impossible to ignore. The silk lining slides against my skin. The sharp lapels and tapered waist command attention from across the distance. It is not the outfit of a fragile, retiring sister surrendering to mental fatigue. It is the armor of a woman who owns the very ground beneath her feet. I stand perfectly still, my spine straight, my eyes locked on the lit stage. At the front of the room, Julian clears his throat. His voice echoes through the speakers, loud and thick with unearned triumph. "Thank you," Julian says, beaming at the crowd. "As your new chief executive officer, I promise." That is exactly as far as my brother gets. Just as the word promise leaves his lips, the heavy oak double doors positioned 3 feet to my left unlock. The thick brass latch clicks. The massive wooden panels swing open with a sudden jarring thud that echoes across the entire ballroom, shattering the delicate illusion on the stage. The heavy oak panels hit the interior brass stoppers with a loud, percussive crack. The sound slices through the residual applause like a falling blade. Conversations snap shut. The remaining clapping stumbles to an awkward halt. A single piece of gold confetti drifts past my eyeline, catching the ambient light before landing softly on the carpet. The silence that follows is thick, suffocating, and immediate. Harrison Cole steps across the threshold. He does not wear a tuxedo. In a room overflowing with velvet lapels, silk bow ties, and glittering evening gowns, his attire is a stark, calculated disruption. He wears a charcoal business suit tailored with precise, unforgiving lines. A crisp white shirt collar sits open without a tie. Under his left arm, he carries a weathered leather folio. He does not pause to survey the crowd. He does not offer a polite nod to the hostess standing near the entrance. He possesses the undeniable gravity of a man who liquidates corporations before breakfast. He begins his descent down the center aisle. His expensive leather shoes strike the polished hardwood floor, creating a rhythmic, metronomic click. The sound echoes against the vaulted ceiling. 150 of the most influential socialites and business figures in Georgia react on pure instinct. They step back. The crowd parts for him, creating a wide, unobstructed path toward the stage. Regional bank presidents pull their wives out of the way. Logistics directors shuffle backward, pressing themselves against the catering tables. The sea of tailored fabric and expensive perfume separates, leaving only empty floorboards ahead of him. I remain standing near the coat check, the blood-red fabric of my suit acting as a beacon in the periphery. Harrison walks past me. We do not exchange a glance. We do not need to. The trap is sprung. My role as the silent observer is finished, and his role as the executioner has begun. I watch his broad shoulders navigate the parted crowd. The air conditioning system kicks on, emitting a low mechanical hum that underscores the profound quiet. The room previously smelled of expensive catering and sweet eucalyptus, but a new, sharper scent permeates the space. It is the distinct, metallic scent of panic. At the front of the ballroom, the carefully constructed illusion fractures. Julian stands frozen at the microphone. His jaw hangs slack. The word promise is still trapped in his throat, a hollow vow interrupted by reality. He blinks, staring down at the approaching billionaire. Julian has spent his entire life protected by a bubble of parental delusion. He lacks the situational awareness to understand immediate danger. A confused, tight smile flickers across his face. He assumes Harrison flew 1,200 miles to attend his coronation. He thinks the chairman of the board is walking down the aisle to shake his hand and validate his unearned title. My father, however, understands the mathematics of disaster. Richard spent 3 decades auditing ledgers, searching for discrepancies hiding behind spreadsheets. He knows what a forensic audit looks like when it arrives in person. His posture collapses. The arrogant, booming patriarch who commanded the room 10 seconds ago vanishes. His shoulders round inward. The color drains from his cheeks, leaving his skin a pale, sickly gray under the harsh, white spotlights. A bead of sweat forms at his temple, catching the glare. He recognizes the leather folio tucked under Harrison's arm. He knows exactly what documents reside inside. Beside him, my mother drops her theatrical facade. Her fingers release the lace handkerchief. It flutters to the floor, landing next to a shattered piece of champagne glass. Her eyes dart frantically between her husband and the approaching figure. She senses the shift in power, but she lacks the vocabulary to articulate it. She reaches out, gripping Richard's sleeve, her knuckles turning white. She looks at Julianne, waiting for her golden child to take control of the situation, but Julianne is just standing there, offering a vacant, confused smile to an apex predator. Harrison reaches the base of the stage. He does not climb the 3 carpeted steps. He stops, planting his feet on the hardwood floor. It is a brilliant display of dominant body language. He forces the three of them to look down at him, yet he holds all the elevation in the room. He does not ask for a microphone. He does not need electronic amplification to project authority. The silence stretches, pulling the tension tighter until the string threatens to snap. My father tries to salvage the narrative. He leans into the microphone stand, gripping the metal pole with trembling hands. His knuckles shake visibly. When he speaks, his voice is thin, reedy, and stripped of all its prior resonance. "Harrison," my father stammers, the southern hospitality dripping from his tongue like spoiled honey. "We did not expect you tonight. What a pleasant surprise. We were just—" Harrison cuts him off. He does not raise his voice. He speaks in a cold, flat register that carries to the farthest corners of the silent ballroom. The acoustics of the vaulted ceiling catch his words, bouncing them off the crystal chandeliers and driving them directly into the chest of every investor present. "You were just concluding a fraud, Richard." The sentence strikes the stage with physical force. Julian's confused smile evaporates, replaced by sheer, naked terror. He stumbles backward a half step away from the microphone, as if the metal stand suddenly burned his palms. He looks at my father, his eyes wide and pleading, waiting for the patriarch to fix the situation. But Richard has nothing left to say. His mouth opens and closes soundlessly, like a fish pulled onto dry land. My mother gasps, a sharp, audible intake of air that carries through the room. She covers her mouth with both hands, her eyes wide with horror. The glittering silver evening gown she wears suddenly looks absurd, a costume on a woman who forgot her lines in the middle of the premiere act. The temperature in the ballroom plummets. The collective breath of 150 guests escapes in a single, synchronized rush. The investors who were clapping enthusiastically 30 seconds ago now stand perfectly rigid. Marcus Vance, the key distributor from Nashville, lowers his champagne flute and stares at the stage, his jaw set in a tight, angry line. He realizes he was almost duped into signing a contract with a sinking ship. The local business journalists instinctually step forward, pulling digital recorders and smartphones from their jacket pockets. They smell blood in the water. Harrison unclasps the leather folio. The crisp sound of the brass latch snapping open echoes in the quiet room. He reaches inside, pulling out a thick stack of legal documents, printed on heavy bond paper. The overhead stage lights catch the sharp black text detailing every forged medical claim and every unauthorized vendor threat. My parents threw a lavish party to steal my empire. They invited the elite to witness my quiet erasure. They believed their social standing in Atlanta would protect them from the consequences of their corporate theft. Instead, they have assembled a captive audience for their own public execution. Richard stares down at the open folio. Panic overrides his logic. He knows he cannot escape the room. He knows the minor investors are watching his every micro-expression, calculating their financial exposure. He realizes his entire reputation in the local business community is hanging by a single, fraying thread. He grips the microphone stand tighter, his knuckles turning a bruised purple, preparing to mount a desperate, pathetic defense. My father refuses to surrender the platform without a fight. Operating on the primal instinct of a cornered animal trying to preserve its territory, Richard grips the metal microphone stand with both hands. He pulls the device closer to his mouth. His knuckles remain a bruised purple. He attempts to summon the commanding Southern patriarch persona that has shielded him from consequences his entire life. "Harrison, please," Richard says, his voice echoing through the vaulted ceiling. His tone drips with a desperate, manufactured diplomacy. "This is a private family matter. We did not want to air this in public, but Azura is suffering from severe mental fatigue. She is unwell. The stress of scaling this operation has broken her stamina. We are simply stepping in to protect the asset and ensure the investors do not suffer from her decline." It is a breathtaking display of real-time manipulation. Richard stands in front of 150 corporate elites and attempts to gaslight the entire room. He tries to frame his calculated theft as a heroic rescue mission. He relies on the old societal bias that a wealthy father knows what is best for his hysterical, exhausted daughter. He hopes the audience will embrace the comfortable narrative of a protective patriarch rather than confront the ugly reality of corporate sabotage. For a fraction of a second, a murmur ripples through the crowd. Some of the older regional bank managers shift on their feet, exchanging uncertain glances. They are conditioned to believe men who wear tailored suits and speak with deep, unshakable authority. They want to believe the polished accountant standing under the chandeliers. But Harrison Cole does not care about paternal authority. He cares about empirical data. The only liability to this asset is the man standing next to you, Harrison barks, cutting my father off before the lie can take root. Harrison does not raise his voice to a shout, but the sheer gravel and ice in his tone slice through the ballroom like a scythe. He steps closer to the stage, closing the physical distance. He locks eyes with my father, refusing to let Richard look away. He strips the warmth from the room, replacing it with the cold, hard mathematics of venture capitalism. I ran the numbers. Richard Harrison states the syllables sharp and unforgiving. Aura Botanicals' profits are up 22% under Azura's sole direction. She reduced shipping delays during a regional freight strike. She secured 3 new national retail accounts in the last quarter. Her logistical framework is operating at peak efficiency. Harrison pauses, letting the statistics settle over the silent crowd. He turns his head slightly, addressing the investors directly, before looking back at my father. There is no mental fatigue. Harrison continues. There is only a proven executive generating unprecedented revenue and a father willing to commit corporate forgery to replace her. The word forgery strikes the crowd like a physical shockwave. The local business journalists who were previously taking casual notes now hold their digital recorders high, their thumbs typing frantically on their smartphones. Marcus Vance, the key distributor from Nashville, crosses his arms and glares at my father, his face flushing with anger. Marcus realizes he was seconds away from shaking hands with a fraudulent executive team. He recognizes the bullet he just dodged. My mother lets out a strangled gasp. She takes a step back away from Richard, her silver evening gown shimmering under the stage lights. She looks at the faces in the crowd, witnessing the instantaneous evaporation of her social standing. The elite circles of Atlanta's society are built on perception, and Harrison has just branded her husband a forger in front of the most powerful gossips in the state. She clutches her bare arms, suddenly looking very small and entirely out of place. Richard shrinks. His posture folds inward. The microphone picks up his ragged, shallow breathing, broadcasting his panic over the speakers. He opens his mouth to speak, but no sound materializes. The sophisticated accountant who drafted a 15-page transition plan cannot find a single syllable to defend himself against the truth. Harrison opens the weathered leather folio he carried down the aisle. He extracts a crisp stack of legal documents printed on heavy bond paper. He holds them up for the front row of investors to see, ensuring everyone understands the physical proof exists. I hold the proxy for the board of directors. Harrison declares his voice carrying the finality of a judge delivering a sentence. There has been no vote to alter the executive leadership of this company. Azura Stephen is the founder, the sole chief executive officer, and the retained holder of 60% equity. Any transition plan presented to you tonight is a total fabrication. The minor investors, the men my father took to expensive steak dinners to lobby against me, pale visibly. They glance nervously at each other, realizing they unknowingly conspired in an illegal coup. They shrink back into the crowd, trying to distance themselves from the blast radius of my father's sinking ship. They understand that their early seed funding does not protect them from the wrath of a billionaire chairman. Having dismantled the architect of the treason, Harrison turns his attention to the beneficiary. He shifts his cold, calculating gaze to Julian. My brother is sweating profusely. The midnight blue tuxedo that looked so elegant 20 minutes ago now resembles a cheap costume draped over a terrified boy. Julian has never faced a consequence he could not charm or complain his way out of. He has always relied on our parents to sweep his failures under the rug, bridging the gap between his ambition and his incompetence. But Richard and Helen are powerless against a man wielding legally binding board proxies. Julian Stephen Harrison says, pronouncing each syllable with rhythmic disdain, "As of 8 o'clock tonight, you are terminated for cause." Julian flinches as if struck by a physical blow. His mouth drops open. He looks at my mother, begging for an intervention, searching for the safety net that has always caught him. But Helen just stares at the floor, paralyzed by the public humiliation, unable to offer a single word of defense. The specific causes are gross breach of fiduciary duty and unauthorized corporate misrepresentation. Harrison continues reading from the top sheet of paper. You do not hold an executive title. You do not hold a single share of equity in this enterprise. You are currently trespassing at a private corporate event. The silence in the ballroom is profound. 150 guests watch a golden child get stripped of his unearned armor. Julian looks down at his polished shoes, unable to meet the eyes of the distributors he was bragging to just moments before. His entire identity, built on the illusion of inherent superiority, shatters into dust on the hardwood stage. The room that was supposed to witness his glorious coronation is now bearing witness to his undeniable professional ruin. Harrison reaches back into his leather folio. He retrieves one final item. It is a sleek, heavy leather binder. The leather is a rich, dark espresso color, adorned with fine stitching and gold-embossed initials on the lower right corner. I recognize the item immediately from my vantage point at the back of the room. Just yesterday, Julian used the corporate credit card to purchase that exact custom monogrammed portfolio. He bought it specifically to hold the new business cards identifying him as the Chief Executive Officer of Aura Botanicals. He expensed the luxury item, assuming his ascension was a foregone conclusion, treating my company accounts like his personal royal treasury. In an act of pure poetic justice, Harrison slides the official termination papers into the interior pocket of Julian's expensive new binder. He snaps the leather cover shut, sealing the legal decree inside the symbol of my brother's vanity. Harrison does not step onto the stage to hand the portfolio to my brother. He treats the exchange with the exact level of disrespect it warrants. He tosses it. The heavy leather binder arcs through the air. It lands on the stage, right at Julian's feet with a loud, definitive thud. The sound reverberates through the floorboards and is caught by the microphone stand echoing through the ballroom. Julian stares down at the gold-embossed initials, realizing that the only document his luxury portfolio will ever hold is the undeniable proof of his own execution. My father drops his grip on the microphone. The sudden release causes the metal stand to wobble, emitting a sharp squeal of audio feedback that makes several guests wince and cover their ears. The patriarch who tried to steal an empire stands defeated, surrounded by the shimmering confetti that now looks like debris from a shipwreck. He looks out at the sea of faces, searching for a single, sympathetic expression to validate his actions. He finds none. The crowd offers only cold judgment and calculating distance. The attendees begin to murmur, the quiet whispers building into a tidal wave of scandalized gossip. Investors are texting their legal teams under the cocktail tables, demanding risk assessments. Distributors are exchanging frantic nods, calculating how to salvage their supply chains and reaffirm their loyalty to the true founder. The elaborate illusion is dead. The glass castle has collapsed, crushing the architects beneath its weight. At the back of the room, I remain standing in my tailored crimson suit. I do not smile. I do not gloat. I watch my family drown in the reality they created for themselves. Harrison turns his back on the stage, dismissing them entirely. He walks down the center aisle, heading straight toward the double doors where I am waiting, knowing the financial fallout of this night is only just beginning to unfold. The collective intake of breath from 150 guests acts like a vacuum, draining the remaining oxygen from the room. The silence is no longer expectant. it is radioactive. On the elevated platform, my father stands paralyzed, his eyes locked on the custom leather portfolio resting at Julian's feet. The shock severs the connection between his brain and his motor functions. The muscles in his hand go slack. The crystal champagne flute slips from his grip. It falls in slow motion, catching the glare of the stage lights before striking the edge of the wooden podium. The delicate glass shatters into dozens of jagged fragments, scattering across the stage. The expensive vintage champagne spills over the polished floorboards, soaking into the hem of my mother's silver evening gown. Nobody moves to clean it up. The sharp, brittle sound of the breaking glass acts as a starting pistol for my brother's psychological unraveling. Julian stares down at the termination papers sealed inside his vanity purchase. The reality of his unemployment clashes against 3 decades of ingrained entitlement. The cognitive dissonance is too much for his fragile ego to process. He regresses instantly, discarding the polished executive persona he spent the last month cultivating. He kicks the leather binder away from his polished shoes. His face flushes a deep, splotchy crimson. He looks up at the billionaire standing below him, and his composure disintegrates. "This is my family's company," Julian shouts. His voice cracks on the final syllable, climbing into a high, panicked register that betrays his profound immaturity. It is the cry of a spoiled child realizing the playground rules no longer apply. He points a shaking finger toward the center aisle, attempting to summon an authority he does not possess. "We built this legacy. You cannot just walk in here and take it." Harrison Cole does not flinch. He regards my brother with a look of pure, unfiltered disdain. It is the kind of look a seasoned predator gives a noisy, insignificant pest. He tilts his head slightly, observing the meltdown with clinical detachment. No Harrison replies, his voice slicing through the humid air of the ballroom. "It is Azura's company. You just worked here, and you did a remarkably poor job of it." The blunt, undeniable truth echoes over the speaker system. Julian opens his mouth to argue, but no words form. He is suffocating under the weight of his own exposure, his lips parting and closing in silent, desperate gasps. He turns toward my father, pleading for the patriarch to intervene. But Richard is busy hyperventilating, staring at the shattered crystal at his feet, his mind racing through the legal implications of forging medical evaluations. Harrison is not finished. He promised me an execution, and he is a man who delivers on his investments. He turns his body to address the wider room, ensuring every journalist and investor hears the final calculation of the evening. Furthermore, Harrison announces, projecting his voice over the rising tide of whispers. Since Julian Stephen is officially terminated for gross fiduciary fraud, his access to all corporate accounts is revoked. I had the financial department cancel his corporate credit card at 8 o'clock sharp. Harrison pauses, letting his gaze drift from the disgraced son to the architects of the treason. He stares directly into my father's wide, terrified eyes. Richard and Helen Stephen Harrison says, pronouncing their names with deliberate, lethal precision. "You signed the hotel contract authorizing this event. You provided the payment method that will decline by midnight. Therefore, you are now personally liable for the $25,000 venue bill. I suggest you locate a different payment method before the hotel management calls local law enforcement to report a theft of services." The financial blow lands with devastating accuracy. My father is an accountant. His entire identity is built on managing liabilities and minimizing risk. The sudden realization that he is personally on the hook for a $25,000 party he threw to steal my empire shatters whatever remained of his composure. He stumbles backward, gripping the edge of the podium to keep from collapsing. His retirement savings, his carefully balanced ledgers, his pristine credit score. They are all suddenly bleeding out on the stage alongside the spilled champagne. The room breaks. The polite restraint of the Atlanta corporate elite shatters under the sheer magnitude of the scandal. The murmurs erupt into a tidal wave of overlapping gossip. Investors pull out their smartphones, texting their legal teams and their partners, detailing the catastrophic collapse of the Stephen family coup. Local media representatives hover near the front row, their camera shutters clicking rapidly, capturing the pale, horrified faces of my parents under the unforgiving stage lights. The social capital my mother spent her entire life hoarding evaporates in a matter of seconds. Helen realizes the cameras are flashing. She looks at the journalists, then down at the stain spreading across her silver gown. She looks out at the country club friends who are currently whispering behind their manicured hands. The instinct for self-preservation overrides her maternal devotion. She turns on Julian. She grabs my brother by the arm of his midnight blue tuxedo, pulling him away from the microphone. She leans in, whispering furiously into his ear, her face twisted in an ugly, desperate grimace. The golden child is no longer the pride of the family. He is the anchor, dragging them to the bottom of the ocean. Julian tries to pull away, but Helen maintains her iron grip, steering him toward the service stairs at the back of the platform. My father abandons the podium, trailing behind them like a beaten dog. The three of them scramble off the stage, fleeing the bright lights and the flashing cameras, retreating into the dark service corridors of the hotel. They leave behind a shattered glass, a rejected leather binder, and the smoking ruins of their ambition. Harrison turns his back on the empty stage. He does not watch them run. He begins his walk back down the center aisle, his expensive shoes clicking a steady, victorious rhythm against the hardwood. The crowd parts for him once again, offering him a wide berth of silent, terrified respect. He walks the length of the ballroom, approaching the heavy oak double doors, where I stand in the shadows. The ambient light from the hallway catches the sharp lapels of my blood-red suit. I keep my spine perfectly straight, my hands resting calmly at my sides. Harrison stops 2 feet away from me. He tucks the weathered leather folio back under his left arm. The corner of his mouth twitches upward, forming a rare, genuine smile. He tilts his head toward the open bar across the room. "Drink?" he asks, his tone conversational, entirely devoid of the ice he deployed seconds ago. I look at the bartender, who is currently staring at me with wide, shocked eyes. I look back at the billionaire who just handed me the severed heads of my saboteurs. "I am good," I reply, keeping my voice steady and clear. Harrison nods. He appreciates the discipline. He adjusts his suit jacket, gives me a single, respectful nod, and walks out the doors, heading toward his waiting town car. I remain in the ballroom for one final moment. I look out over the glittering space. I see the towering floral arrangements that mimic my botanical formulas. I see the gold confetti dusting the floorboards. I see the empty lit stage where my family tried to erase my existence. I look at the wreckage of the party they threw to steal my life, and I feel nothing but a profound, soaring clarity. The strangler fig has been uprooted. The soil is mine again. I turn my back on the Atlanta elite. I push the heavy oak doors wide open, stepping out of the chilled, air-conditioned theater of high society. I walk out into the warm, humid night, taking a deep breath of the real world. It has been exactly 6 months since I walked out of the St. Regis Ballroom and into the humid Atlanta night, leaving my family standing in the wreckage of their own ambition. Today, the air inside my executive suite is cool, quiet, and perfectly calibrated. The heavy-duty cardboard banker's box is gone. My framed degrees hang proudly on the painted walls. The vintage brass desk lamp casts a warm, steady glow across my polished wood desk. The silence in my office is no longer a tactical retreat designed to lull an enemy into complacency. It is the sound of total, uncompromised ownership. The fallout from the gala was swift, surgical, and permanent. Julian Stephen is currently unemployed. It turns out a generic business degree provides zero insulation when a billionaire venture capitalist terminates you for gross fiduciary fraud in front of 150 industry leaders. The corporate ecosystem in the Southeast is a small, interconnected neighborhood. The gossip from the ballroom spread through the city before the hotel catering staff finished sweeping up the shattered crystal champagne flute. My brother learned a harsh, unforgettable lesson about gravity. When you build a glass castle on a stolen foundation, the fall breaks every bone in your ego. Recruiters do not return his calls. Mid-tier logistics firms delete his resume the moment his name triggers a background search. The wealthy country club friends who drank his expensive bourbon and listened to his visionary speeches suddenly stopped inviting him to their weekend golf outings. They recognize a sinking asset when they see one. Julian spends his days sitting in his apartment. He does not wear the custom midnight blue tuxedo anymore. He relies on a diminishing savings account, forced to reckon with a reality where a confident smile cannot forge a paycheck. My father experienced a different, much colder kind of ruin. The hospitality management at the St. Regis did not accept apologies or promises of future goodwill. They demanded immediate payment for the $25,000 invoice. Richard, an accountant who spent 3 decades worshiping fiscal conservatism, had to liquidate a substantial portion of his personal retirement portfolio. He incurred steep early withdrawal penalties just to settle the debt and avoid a public theft of services charge. But the financial hemorrhage was secondary to the legal strike. I did not drive down to his accounting firm in Decatur to gloat. I did not engage in a dramatic confrontation in his lobby. I simply hired a specialized corporate attorney. On a Tuesday morning, a uniformed courier walked into my father's pristine waiting room. The courier bypassed the receptionist and handed Richard a heavy legal envelope. It contained a formal cease and desist order regarding the forged medical evaluations he presented to Harrison Cole in New York. The document promised immediate civil litigation and criminal fraud charges if Richard ever attempted to misrepresent my medical history or my operational standing again. For a certified public accountant, a formal accusation of forgery is a professional death sentence. The document effectively stripped him of his patriarchal authority, reducing him to a frightened man hiding behind his desk. The courier required a signature for delivery. I have the signed receipt framed inside the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet, a quiet daily reminder that blood does not excuse betrayal. The weeks following the gala brought a predictable storm of desperate communication. My parents called my personal cell phone every single day for a month. They left dozens of voicemails. I listened to them while drinking my morning coffee, fascinated by their refusal to accept the new reality. Their messages oscillated wildly between weeping apologies and shrill, indignant demands. My mother would leave a 5-minute voicemail begging for forgiveness, framing the entire corporate coup as a tragic misunderstanding. She would cry, insisting family must stick together during hard times. 2 hours later, she would call back, her tone hardened. She would pivot to anger, insisting it was my familial duty to issue a public statement clearing Julian's reputation. They wanted me to fix the wreckage they created. They wanted the competent scapegoat to clean up the golden child's mess one last time, to sacrifice my credibility to save his pride. I did not return a single call. I did not draft a single text message. I did not drive to my childhood home for a screaming match. Arguments imply a negotiation, and my sovereignty was no longer up for debate. I listened to their demands, their tears, and their guilt trips, and I felt nothing but a profound, soaring indifference. On the 30th day, I contacted my cellular provider and permanently blocked their phone numbers. I routed their email addresses directly to a hidden trash folder. I did not build a fence. I poured a boundary made of solid, reinforced concrete. In botany, removing a parasitic vine requires ruthless precision. If you leave a single root, the strangler fig will return, creeping up the trunk, to steal the sunlight once again. I pruned my family from the root system of my company, and the host tree responded with unprecedented growth. Aura Botanicals is thriving, free from the constant sabotage of an incompetent vice president and the looming threat of a hostile takeover. My logistics team operates at peak efficiency. Our valuation has tripled over the last 2 quarters. We recently expanded our manufacturing facility to accommodate a new, highly lucrative international shipping contract. I replaced the vacant executive role with a brilliant woman named Sarah. I poached Sarah from a major rival firm in Chicago, offering her a generous compensation package and real voting equity. Sarah possesses a master's degree in supply chain management. She arrives at the office at 6 in the morning. She knows the exact chemical profile of our cold-pressed rosehip oil. She treats Valerie and the warehouse staff with deep, genuine respect. Sarah earns every single dollar of her salary, and she never once asks me to praise her for doing her job. I own my narrative. I own my company. The equity split remains exactly as it should be. The transition plan my father drafted sits in a deleted digital archive, a relic of a failed siege. I spent the first 30 years of my life shrinking myself to protect the fragile egos of people who shared my genetics. I swallowed my pride. I handed over science fair checks. I smiled silently while my brother took credit for my marketing campaigns. I thought keeping the peace was the definition of being a loyal daughter. I learned the hard way that peace built on your own quiet erasure is just a slow execution. If you are sitting in a room right now letting someone else claim the credit for the empire you built out of fear of rocking the boat, I want you to stop. Let the boat tip. Let the passengers fall into the water. You built the vessel. You know how to swim. Tell me in the comments, what was the exact moment you stopped letting your family rewrite your reality? And if this story resonated with you, hit subscribe. There is always more to the story. Family is supposed to be the nutrient-rich soil from which we grow, the deep, unshakable foundation that grounds us as we reach toward the sun. But what happens when that very soil turns toxic? What happens when the hands that were meant to nurture your roots decide instead to harvest your branches to keep someone else warm? The story of Azura Stephen and her company, Aura Botanicals, offers a powerful critique of toxic family dynamics and provides a roadmap for personal empowerment within the context of American corporate and family life. It forces us to hold a mirror up to our own living rooms and dining tables, asking uncomfortable, necessary questions about parenting, honesty, and the true, often hidden cost of blind familial loyalty. In the United States, our cultural mythology is deeply intertwined with the concept of the self-made individual. For parents, particularly those in the U.S., where individualism and meritocracy are core values, this story serves as a cautionary tale regarding favoritism and the golden child syndrome. Azura built her company from a studio apartment through grueling labor, sacrificing sleep, comfort, and youth to build a thriving logistics powerhouse. Yet her parents, Richard and Helen, viewed Azura's hard-earned company not as her individual achievement, but as a family asset that should be handed to their son, Julian, despite his utter lack of competence. This is where the traditional family structure often fractures under the weight of its own unspoken biases. Parents must respect the boundaries of their children's professional lives and not force them to share the spotlight with siblings who haven't earned it. By constantly shielding Julian from the consequences of his failures, Richard and Helen ultimately left him ill-equipped for the real world. They did not protect him. They intellectually and professionally crippled him. True family education should focus on building character and competence rather than manufacturing unearned titles. When we prioritize an illusion of equality over the reality of hard work, we rob our children of the resilience required to survive. The failure of Julian's education, despite his MBA, highlights that academic credentials cannot replace the foundational values of hard work and honesty. Family education must instill a sense of responsibility rather than a sense of entitlement. Perhaps the most devastating element of Azura's journey is the profound emotional betrayal committed by those who were supposed to be her safest harbor. To justify their betrayal, the sources illustrate how the parents weaponized Azura's hard work against her, calling her selfish or emotionally volatile. This is the absolute toxicity of gaslighting. When a parent looks at their child and decides to rewrite their sanity to fit a convenient, selfish narrative, it leaves scars that rarely fade. Forcing a narrative of mental fragility to benefit another child is a profound breach of trust that leads to permanent estrangement. The narrative challenges traditional views that often prioritize gendered roles or birth order over actual merit. In this story, family loyalty was weaponized to break a successful daughter. The lesson here is that true loyalty is a two-way street based on mutual respect and integrity, not a tool for manipulation. Furthermore, the traditional value of protecting the family should never supersede legal and ethical standards. Richard's desperate willingness to commit corporate forgery to help his son resulted in financial ruin and the destruction of the family unit. A lie, even one dressed up as parental love, will eventually collapse under its own weight. Yet, from the ashes of this familial betrayal rises a breathtaking blueprint for survival. From Azura's perspective, the message to the younger generation, especially those navigating family-owned businesses or high-pressure environments, is one of strategic self-reliance. Her experience warns young entrepreneurs to be wary of hiring blood out of guilt, as family members can sometimes act like strangler figs that eventually kill the host tree. When faced with the ultimate betrayal, Azura didn't engage in screaming matches. She recognized that fighting a loud, emotional battle would only feed the false narrative of her instability. Silence is a strategic tool. Instead of arguing, she gathered evidence, secured her supply chain, and collaborated with powerful allies like Harrison Cole. The red suit she wore, hidden under her drab, parent-approved coat, symbolizes the internal power and readiness that a professional must maintain even when being underestimated. Azura's final advice is clear and unapologetic. If someone is trying to steal your empire or rewrite your reality, let the boat tip. Do not fear rocking the boat. It is terrifying to let the people you love fall into the water. But establishing boundaries made of concrete is sometimes the only way to ensure your own tree continues to thrive. We all have moments in our lives where we are asked to shrink ourselves to make others comfortable, to accept a smaller portion of our own success to keep the peace at the dinner table. If Azura's journey of reclaiming her narrative and pruning the toxic roots from her life resonates with the battles you are currently fighting, I encourage you to subscribe and follow the channel Sophia Told Stories. It is a space dedicated to exploring the unspoken truths, the painful, beautiful realities of human resilience, and the stories that make us feel a little less alone in our struggles. As the dust finally settles on Aura Botanicals, we are left to quietly examine the gardens of our own lives. We must look at the hands that prune us and the roots that hold us down. When a child has to become a fortress of concrete and silence to protect themselves from their own parents, we must ask what was truly lost in the battle. The tree stands tall, the boundaries are unyielding, and the strangler fig has been cut away. But in the quiet hours of the night, as the leaves rustle in the wind, one cannot help but wonder, does the tree ever mourn the soil it was forced to leave behind? Or does it only remember the sheer, magnificent strength it took to survive it?